Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
You are going to die in an hour and a half. You are going to die at the end of the play.
Oh, what's that supposed to mean? That's not funny.
From New York, this is Theater Talk. I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
And I'm the show's producer, Susan Haskins.
I'm very, very pleased to have our guest tonight. He is giving a phenomenal performance in Ionesco's Exit the King on Broadway. Geoffrey Rush won the Oscar for Shine. He was also terrific as Peter Sellers in the HBO movie, I believe it was, about Peter Sellers. And you are making your Broadway debut here with Exit the King, are you not?
I am indeed. I feel like I'm on Mastermind. Did you ever have Mastermind on?
No, what is
Mastermind is where you'd sit in a room with very few lights on you, and someone would be opposite you, and they'd ask you, your special subject would be something like astrophysics. And they'd ask you really, really, really hard questions.
Okay.
What is it like to translate Ionesco from the original French, Geoffrey? Mastermind?
Yeah, pass.
Well, welcome to Broadway.
Thank you.
Terrific performance on so many, many levels, especially the physicality. I mean, you are all over that stage, moving, running around all over that stage. Dancing, almost. Very musical.
I'm auditioning for a musical, really.
Exactly. This is what I wanted to ask you. I was talking to, there's a very nice usher at the Barrymore Theater named John, and he took me aside and he said, do you know Geoffrey Rush loves Broadway musicals? Is that true?
Yeah. Been a buff since I was in... since I was in high school.
Really?
Yeah.
Which ones? What did you listen to?
Well, in those days, it was mostly what... We had a company in Australia called J.C. Williamson's that would basically... The choreographer from that company used to come to Broadway and take notes and then come back and kind of recreate the shows. It was a very big-time professional company. In fact, it was the only major touring theatrical outfit in the country. So at that stage, it was things like Oliver and Mame and Fiddler on the Roof and Half a Sixpence. Canterbury Tales.
Oh yes,
For the real buffs.
Didn't you play Snoopy in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown?
I did. I have had a brief moment of being a song and dance man. It's a very neat little musical.
Well, but that role kind of reminds me of what you do in Exit the King. I can, I sort of see
Exit Mame. Exit the Hotel. So, but I mean, is it?
I do have a running gag with a lot of my gay friends that I'm always doing Carol Channing at some point in the performance. and King Berenger, even in a very intellectual, existential, absurdist French play, it allows for a bit of Carol Channing in there, which is what's so good about the theatre of it, I think.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Have you done many musicals, though, aside from Snoopy in your career?
No. I'm not really a singer. I did go through a very lengthy audition process in Australia for Miss Saigon to play...
Oh, the Jonathan Pryce.
Engineer, yeah.
You would have been great.
I'd seen Jonathan do it here. Well, I think he had the same problems with equity when he came here.
Yes.
Because the role is technically Asian.
That's right, yes.
Right. Or Eurasian, I think is how they worked around.
Watching you so brilliantly in Exit the King, you thought you could turn this into a musical.
Well, you can see that it's been repressed and bottled up for years to actually be Mame. And I've just found it in a completely different vehicle.
How did this production of the play come together? You've worked with the theatre group in Sydney, and Neil Armstrong.
Armfield.
I'm sorry, Neil Armfield.
My director never ever walked on the moon. I think he imagines that he has. He often thinks that when he directs, it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But no, Neil Armfield. We met in 1980, and over the last 29 years or so, we've been theatrical colleagues and done, I don't know, 15 productions together. And he directs a company called Belvoir Theatre in Sydney.
That's where I first saw you in Exit the King a few years ago.
And we had done the play there and at Malthouse in Melbourne, which is sort of like a sister company. And during the Sydney run, one of our Broadway producers, who's an expatriate Australian...
Howard Panter.
Well, Stuart Thompson, I'm thinking of, but Howard as well saw it down in Melbourne. And they both, you know, they worked with Robert Fox and said, you know, we'd really love to get this to Broadway, which is a great thrill.
Now, you and I spoke a couple of weeks ago about this, and because the performance is so physical, you had mentioned to me, I think I may have asked you, it's easy to embellish. And you've been doing it a while in Australia. Did you find, before you came to Broadway, you'd sort of added maybe too many bells and whistles and sort of flouncy things on it?
No, in fact, we trimmed a lot back, because I think when we were first discovering or trying to decipher what the play had inside of it, because it's a weird piece.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't follow traditional narrative techniques and all that sort of stuff. It's absurdist.
Yeah.
So sometimes you'll read it and you think, what's going on here? And then eventually you find out that there's some kind of hidden theatricality buried away in the dialogue that are kind of like coded stage directions from Ionesco. Like Shakespeare, he never gives you, he just says you come on or you go off.
Exit pursued by bear.
That's right. Well, that's a good
one.
one. That's when he really let his hair down.
Yeah.
So during this rehearsal period, which is the third time that we've had a chance to work on it, which is great. I mean, it deepens the work. We made it, I think, a bit more truthful. I got away with a few, you know, much scrappier and insolent bits of theatrical endeavour in Sydney. Like I have a bit at the beginning of the second half where he marches to prove that he's still agile and alive.
Yeah.
And I drink out of I've got a hot water bottle and I take a big guzzle of that, because it first happened. I was actually parched. I thought, oh, well, it's the only water on stage is in this, so I drank out of it. And the audience found that quite amusing. And then I used to spit it out, and it would hit the front row, and I'd say, sorry about the splash. You know, that's the trouble if you book too early, which used to get a huge It was a bit Barry Humphries, you know, because he's a sort of mentor god in our part of the world. And Neil said, I think we can get rid of all of that. I think it's sort of taking away from the undercurrents of the play, because even though this play has got a lot of comic brilliance in the writing and the burlesque of the performance style, the King is constantly falling over. It's like being Buster Keaton playing the King.
Very much. That was in my mind. Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, all the great silent comedians.
At the end of the play, I think people are quite surprised that it packs a bit of a wallop.
Right.
There was a woman who came in the other night, and she came backstage and said, I came along thinking I was going to see probably a weird and wonderful piece of French, you know, absurdist writing. And she said, I lost my father a few months ago. And she said, I had no idea the play was about a person's death, as well as being about a country's demise or a kingdom's, you know, decay. Yeah,
for those who haven't seen the play, we should say Exit the King is about, you play a tyrant, really, who's got 2 hours, an hour and 45 minutes left to live. When
plus
the play
interval.
begins.
Intermission.
Plus the interval. And he is decaying, and his kingdom has decayed. And yet he's just grasping at life. He's going to do everything he can to hang on.
Yeah, he's cunning.
Yeah.
But eventually I think he loses all of that megalomaniacal, you know, rather repulsive kind of aspect of human leadership and becomes as vulnerable as the next person. And I would like to think, well, it feels in playing it that the audience moves from being like 1,000 collective people in a theatre who are all enjoying the slapstick and the wordplay and the fun and the ideas of the piece. By the end, it feels like 1,000 individual minds sitting out there in the dark going, this play is taking me to a very curious place, like, what would it be like when I leave my life?
Very much so. But I did find myself wondering, forgive the question, Michael, if there was any political realities informing this production, that being
Not
the
directly.
President Bush.
When I first read it, which was about 10 or 12 years ago, it didn't really sort of ring any bells about a contemporary... The only thing that rang bells were ecological themes. Yeah. That the play, being written in 1962, kind of has beat everybody in terms of, you know, even Ralph Nader, who came out to Australia, I think, in the early 70s, ringing alarm bells and saying, you know, the ecosystem of our planet has got a limited life.
Right.
We've got to stop this post-industrial, you know, sacking of the planet, because the industrialized world is just spewing all their waste and junk, you know, into the natural balance of the planet and stuff. Ionesco really picks up on that in a very it's a metaphoric way. He never says it in a sort of way that you think, look, I can read that in the paper if I want to hear that.
Yeah, he's not Al Gore.
No.
No, he's not preaching. No.
But that a lot of people are very aware of that as a thematic thing. But by the time we decided to do the play, which was only 2 years ago, yes, there was definitely, we thought, isolated as, you know, away from any kind of context. It's still a fascinating play, but there was the added bonus that we were in a period, particularly in Australia, we'd had a Prime Minister who'd been elected 4 times in 11 years, in some rather questionable circumstances of, you know, where people were really in you know, analysts in columns were sort of taking the government to account, and the people were calling the government to account to say, oh, there's too much stuff going on here that we feel is being masked from the normal due processes that should come out through the Fourth Estate, I believe it's called. And, you know, similarly, the Blair government was sort of getting tired. Yeah. You know, and Bush had been in for 2 terms, and, you know, within those 2 terms, major catastrophic events had happened within the administration that people were asking questions about, you know. So the play resonates on that level because it is very much about
the mind of the monarch.
The mind of a monarch who says, what I say goes.
The divine right of kings.
Yeah. But it's fascinating, though, a character study, because his entire life has been what I say goes, and suddenly he's at the point in his life where what he says, no one's listening to anymore.
That's right, yeah.
It's over.
It's brilliant. I mean, the play is beautifully structured. I try to think of it sort of as, probably more as a translator. It's like a DNA double helix where you've got the king in a Shakespearean sense of being representative of the state or the kingdom or the world. And the other strand of going through that is this interior strand of just his own untouched humanity that he has to sort of come to terms with.
I think when Ionesco wrote, you said 62? Would he have been, because he was Eastern European, he would have seen, and maybe with prescience, what would have happened to the Ceausescus of the world. When I think of this play, I think of what happened, the unraveling of Eastern Europe, and Mr. and Madame Ceausescu, the most powerful people in Romania. Sure. And then at the very end, there are 2 little old people lined up. The
final shot of them is
lined
like
up against the wall to
it?
be shot. They're just like two little old people on the line of the story.
Look, you can go back to the great despots of history. I suppose at first one looks to a European context because that's very much how Ionesco wrote it. But you know, the Pol Pots of the world, or you know, the genocide. I mean, all of that is there. He's made this king 400 years old. He's sort of like a package deal of all rulers that have ever been. And the guard that Brian Hutchison plays in the piece is sort of like the permanent watchdog, Mr. Mechanic, proletariat that's always been under the thumb and travelled through that, I don't know, post-Renaissance to industrial kind of time. That's very much the historical perspective that I think Ionesco gives to it.
You're joined in this play by Susan Sarandon,
yes,
making her Broadway debut, or she hasn't been on Broadway?
No, she was in a play she was in some piece about Richard Nixon back in '72.
Ah, yes. Okay.
And she's done some off-Broadway things like the Guys, you know, the play that was kind of like a reading,
Oh,
I
yes,
think,
no, yes, she was marvelous about 9/11, the fireman,
Oh, that's right, yeah. Now, she hadn't been on Broadway in a while, and of course you are this just gigantic theatrical character. Did she sort of come to you in any way and tell you a few tips on how to get sort of back into the style of performing live for 1,000 people, having been in the movies as long as she's been in?
No, she loved the play. We sent her the play, and I sent, I think, a pretty good cover letter.
What'd you say? What'd you say?
I can't remember. It was purple.
Royal.
That's all I can remember.
Royal
it was
color.
royal. I wrote royally to Susan Sarandon. she loved the play, and I know that Tim Robbins, her partner, his group, the Actors Gang in LA, had done a production maybe 10 years ago. So Tim was very aware of the play, so hopefully they talked over coffee or whatever. And we landed on Susan's availability just at the right time, because I've read subsequently in press that she said things like, you know, her kids are now late teens, she hasn't got to be the weekend basketball mom and all that sort of stuff. And she was looking for a challenge. And she really liked the meat of the play, and it really kind of called her towards it. And of course we have this curious history together, because we worked together on Banger Sisters very briefly.
I'm sorry, what's Banger?
On the Banger Sisters, which is a groupie film with Goldie Hawn. And Susan handed me my Oscar, because she won the year before as Best Actress for Dead Man Walking. So she presented it to me, and it was just one of those extraordinary nights of my life where, you know, I got up in a state of complete numbness, you know, as you do, and you know what to do because you've seen other people do it on television. You know, you felt like Chance the Gardener, you know, the Peter Sellers character. I knew what to do. Walk up, kiss your partner, walk up the stairs, accept statue, turn, you know. But I was like, I felt like, you know, when you go ruse shooting, not that I've ever done that, but the ruse, you have a spotlight and they get dazzled by it. That's how I felt. She could obviously see that look. And she said this beautiful thing. She said, just take your time. And it was like, there was such a kind of generosity and simplicity and warmth to it that I then made a, you know, okay speech, I think, and felt quite calm. And you
see, when should you accept the Tony Award, and if you take your time, they'll have this orchestra that will well up.
Playing Mame, I hope.
Playing Mame, exactly. If we just go back sort of to your beginnings, really, your early days, what was it that made you decide to, you know, take this risky life of being an actor? Were you from a theatrical family? Were you surrounded by theatrical types?
No. There were two things, I think. Well, no, there were several things. The two key things. One was I grew up in Queensland, so I was like about 7 or 8 in the late 50s, before we had television. We got television in 1959. So in 57, 58, when I started school, I saw the sort of dying stages of travelling vaudeville.
Music hall sorts of things?
I sound ancient, don't I?
No, but that's what a gift.
It is, yeah. You can see
and these guys, they were a travelling tent show. And they'd been around since the 20s, I think, you know what I mean? And they were literally on I don't think they survived a year or two beyond because of television.
And
they had a canvas proscenium arch theatre inside the tent, you know, and the curtain would go up on strings and there'd be borders and all of that. And by night they do a very lewd variety show with sight acts and blue comedians and, you know, slightly R-rated or whatever. And then by day they do a pantomime, which is not so known here, but in the English style, where the chief comedian would play the dame, you know, if you were doing...
cross-dressing sorts of things.
Mother Goose or whatever, so somewhere between that and Mame, I don't know, I should have turned out much different, but anyway. That had a big impact on me when I was 7 or 8. I just thought, wow, this is, you know, I could probably draw you the backdrops now. They sort of like, it was one of those moments where someone waved a wand and I went, this is better than anything. You know? And then I went to school. I did a lot of high school stuff, plays, went to university, thought, you know, there was no professional theatre company in the town that I grew up in. There was no... People just didn't do it. I didn't know anyone who did it, you know. Amateur theatre and stuff like that. So I thought I'd probably end up teaching. And then I went to university, and it was a very active time on campus in the late 60s, early 70s, and we studied theatre academically and stuff, so we did a lot of stuff. And during that time, a professional company was set up in Brisbane, and the director of the company saw me and some colleagues at that time who've stayed in the profession, you know, like we've been full-time actors since that time. And he invited us in to be part of the core group of this newly formed company. So it was the inspiration and the sort of mesmerizing beacon of being 7 and experiencing that. And I think it comes out in what I'm doing in Exit the King.
Completely. I mean, you say
certainly the makeup belongs to 1958.
And it's interesting because you say you studied theater academically, so you've got the great European writers, Ionesco, because you've also translated this, adapted this for the stage. Yeah. You've got that strand going with the old music hall vaudeville type of performing.
Yeah, it's sort of, it's all come together in this. Well, it's affected a lot of the kind of work that Neil and I have been engaged in, not so much to borrow the vaudeville trappings, but inspired by how much fun the theatre can be.
Yeah. Well, and all sort of that.
We've never liked what we call a dark brown night in the theatre, where you sit there thinking, I know this is supposed to be good for me, but I'm really bored.
Yes, we've had a few of those in my career.
I was just thinking of how the Ionesco breaks through the fourth wall, to use a pretentious term, and I would imagine that traveling company in Australia was very involved in that kind of feeling.
Yeah, they're always out in the crowd, or talking to the audience. And I mean, Shakespeare did all of that. It's a very exciting thing, and the great thing for us is because when we did Exit the King in Sydney and Melbourne, it was always in a sort of more modern or converted theatre, more off-Broadway kind of scale of thing. So now that we're on Broadway in a proper proscenium, it makes you realise how Ionesco was subverting the formalities of that sort of French boulevard comedy. Yeah. He plays with that, and it's nice to be within the restrictions of...
So you can jump out of it.
Well, kind of. Audiences, once I leave the stage and start to walk amongst the audience, who are presumably all the people who've ever died before, that's a pretty weird, hip concept.
And an owner's responsibility for the audience.
Yeah, well, they all start moving their bags.
That's right. Well, that's what I did. I moved my water.
That's a technical actor question for you, because I was on the aisle last night when you were walking up, and I thought, what if he looks at me? Because I might wave. Yeah. is it that it do not look...
I'll pull out a Pirates photo and say, just don't, not to anyone, just write your name.
Has that happened to you?
No, thank goodness.
Do you not look at do you not make eye contact with people?
Oh, no, I do. I make very direct.
Really? Yeah. And you can see them squirm?
They don't squirm. I mean, I think they're kind of... They feel... I mean, they could be asleep, I don't know. But no, they feel engaged with the play, because the play keeps swerving and careering into quite strange, unpredictable directions. Yeah. And that's the great thing about 99.9% of the audience don't know about this play. Mm-hmm. So everything is like first level in terms of experience of what the events that happen in the play. Mm. And I don't think they can predict where it's going to go. And it goes exactly where it tells you it's going to go. Absolutely. He's going to die at the end. Yes. And you just watch him go through every possible phase of denial and grief and self-pity and whatever.
For me, the moment where the play turns and really the absurdism recedes for a moment, and you suddenly are brought up into what's really going to happen to this man, is when that ridiculous orange wig you wear is gone for the first time, and then there's just the little tufts of white hair. Yeah. That's, for me, kind of a little bit of a shift in the tone.
Yeah. Well, that's the magic of Ionesco's very, highly distinctive theatrical touch, is he gives you a stage direction that says the king's hair suddenly turns white.
You should keep your eyes open, audience, on how it is staged with the help of the wonderful Andrea Martin, that your hair turns white.
My son, when he saw it the other night, and he now knows the bit.
Yes,
where we do a bit of sleight of hand. But I think he saw it like 4 times in Sydney before he didn't get distracted. Yep. It's fun. Yep. But then Ionesco gives us some other weird stage directions, like by theatrical magic, Queen Marie disappears. That's all he said. It's a bit like Exit pursued by a bear. Yeah. You know what I mean? Sure, work that out. And I'm sure over the years there have been productions where people have done trapdoors and, I don't know, gauzes have come in and clever lighting and whatever. Yeah. And we've interpreted that in a very, simple, hopefully evocative way.
Yeah. No, well, yes. Well, we don't want to give it away because it's one of the surprising things.
No, we're totally out of time.
We're out of time. I'm sorry. Geoffrey Rush, it's been a delight chatting with you, and just terrific in Exit the King at the Ethel Barrymore Theatre, and I hope it's just the first of many appearances on Broadway.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay. And just your chance, what musical would you like to star in for the producers who are watching?
Oh, look, I was very attracted to Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. I thought that was such a great piece.
That's right. You could do that very well. Jonathan Pryce was in that.
Yeah, no, fabulous. And the wonderful John Lithgow.
A revival is underway as we speak. Starring Geoffrey Rush. Thanks for being our guest tonight on Theatre Talk.
Thank you.
Son, help me. Come now and flood into me. My feet are getting cold. Come and warm me up. Come into my body, under my skin. Into my eyes, rekindle their failing light so I can see. Son, will you miss me?